In this podcast episode, Lionel Shriver, the acclaimed author of the novel The Better Life, joins to discuss the complex and controversial issue of immigration in Western countries, particularly the United States and the United Kingdom. The conversation explores political decisions influencing immigration flows, cultural and gender dynamics surrounding immigration attitudes, the disconnect between immigrant ambitions and host community responses, and broader societal challenges related to demographics, identity, and personal responsibility. Shriver opens by underlining that mass immigration is not an inevitable natural phenomenon, but the result of deliberate political choices. She argues that administrations, especially the Biden administration in the U.S., have purposefully opened borders, facilitating and even encouraging large numbers of immigrants to enter and settle. Contrary to narratives that portray immigration as a spontaneous or unmanageable process, Shriver insists it is enabled by policymakers who often lack self-interest in protecting native populations. These political decisions create a dissonance between stated economic justifications, such as addressing workforce shortages, and actual policy outcomes that lead to weaker economies and greater social strain. Shriver's novel is distinct in its focus on the host community's perspective rather than the immigrants, which is a rarity in contemporary literature. Most immigration narratives tend to sympathize with the immigrant experience, casting immigration in a positive light by portraying immigrants as vulnerable and aspirational figures. Shriver challenges this, portraying an American middle-class family whose invitation to an immigrant leads to tragic consequences. This approach raises questions about the imbalance in cultural storytelling and the difficulty of discussing immigration honestly without ideological bias. The conversation delves into the notion of suicidal empathy, originally coined by Gad Saad, which Shriver adapts to describe what she sees as suicidal vanity. She critiques the progressive left's approach to immigration as less about genuine empathy and more about moral exhibitionism and virtue signaling. The people championing immigration often act from a place of seeking moral status rather than addressing the real complexities and potential harms involved. This performative allyship, she suggests, is condescending to immigrants themselves, who are frequently construed as innocent and uncritically admired, despite evidence that many have strategic, self-interested motivations. Shriver points out that many immigrants are highly strategic and knowledgeable about immigration laws and welfare systems. Far from being simply vulnerable individuals seeking refuge, many act out of clear self-interest to maximize the benefits they can obtain. This transactional view conflicts with common political rhetoric and highlights contradictions within welfare policies that fail to filter for skills or economic utility. Rather than admitting this pragmatic reality, progressive frameworks often insist on idealized views of immigrants, which ultimately harms both immigrants and host societies. The gendered nature of immigration debates forms a major thread in the discussion. Shriver notes that women, especially progressive women, tend to drive much of the inviting attitude toward immigrants, often motivated by social incentives to be seen as kind and morally correct. However, this can devolve into vanity and condescension, ignoring the full human complexity of immigrants. Conversely, men, particularly younger men like the book's protagonist Nico, are often resistant or passive and struggle with masculinity in a world that feels increasingly alien. The clash between these gendered responses reflects broader cultural tensions around identity and responsibility. Nico, the central character in Shriver's novel, epitomizes a generation of young men who reject traditional adult responsibilities. With an engineering degree in hand but no desire to pursue a career, Nico shirks commitment and ambition, preferring comfort and ease. Shriver candidly describes this as a form of demasculinization and disengagement from cultural and familial legacy. However, Nico's journey also includes tentative steps toward embracing masculine virtues such as strength, protection, and responsibility, especially when faced with real danger affecting his family. This struggle mirrors societal losses of classical masculine values. The characters' behaviors are shaped by incentives, social, economic, and personal. Women in the story seek social approval, immigrants pursue better lives using the system's loopholes, and men like Nico avoid hardships. This dynamic underscores how societal institutions reward moral performance over practical action, enabling dysfunction. Shriver ties these perverse incentives to a broader social trend. Comfort and avoidance have become paramount at the expense of legacy, contribution, and meaningful objection. A key cultural crisis highlighted is the collapse in birth rates and the generational refusal to have children, which Shriver and the host identify as profoundly destabilizing. The absence of children leads to demographic decline and a fading of cultural continuity. The maternal instincts and energies that might otherwise anchor families and neighborhoods dissipate when adults, like the family in the novel, remain childless by choice or circumstance. This demographic phenomenon is linked to a broader retreat from adulthood, ambition, and commitment, a social and cultural suicide. The conversation addresses the historical roots of Western asylum policies, in part born from the lingering guilt over failing to protect refugees during World War II. While such guilt was once appropriate, Shriver contends it has now been misdirected and weaponized to justify unlimited immigration claims regardless of merit or reason. The asylum system in its current legal form rewards anyone who manages to enter territory, encouraging gaming and widespread exploitation. This weakens Western countries' sovereignty and fuels cultural insecurity. Shriver argues that the willingness to see one's own culture as inherently evil or beyond repair has led to a lack of self-protection and self-respect. This passivity allows mass immigration without checks, feeding resentment and social fragmentation. The erosion of pride and attachment to Western traditions contributes to a defensive collapse where borders become permeable and societies feel overrun. The failure to assert cultural boundaries is both a symptom and a cause of decline. The episode highlights a candid perspective on how immigrants themselves might view Western hosts as gullible and naive. The hospitality shown to immigrants who break laws and enter without permission is sometimes seen by them not as generosity, but as weakness and foolishness. This dynamic further complicates integration and respect. The host's inability or unwillingness to stop unauthorized immigration, Shriver insists, feeds this contempt and erodes social cohesion. The discussion touches on contemporary forms of activism, particularly among progressives, as often grounded in nihilism rather than constructive change. Protesting at ICE operations or adopting radical stances may convey a sense of purpose and status, but lacks the creativity and long-term investment of building supportive institutions. Shriver contrasts these easy performances with the difficult but meaningful work of nurturing communities, raising children, and building legacies. The absence of future-oriented vision contributes to despair and cultural exhaustion. Toward the end, Shriver points to a looming issue rarely discussed: water scarcity. She highlights that population growth, fueled by immigration policies, strains natural resources such as fresh water. The United States, in particular, faces critical groundwater depletion that threatens sustainability. This environmental constraint serves as an additional reason, beyond politics and culture, to reconsider current immigration trajectories. Shriver shares a candid personal note about her own late decision not to have children, acknowledging the complexity and regret inherent in choices around family and legacy. This self-awareness adds nuance to her critique of declining birth rates and societal disengagement, showing that the challenges are not simple or hypocritical, but deeply human. The episode closes by emphasizing cultural differences in survival strategies, comparing Western comfort-driven mindsets to the harsh realities faced by many immigrants from conflict zones and difficult environments. Shriver notes that those accustomed to struggle may be more aggressive and assertive, further accentuating clashes with Western passivity. Understanding these differences is crucial to grasping the full picture of immigration's social impact. When asked where a young person might consider relocating given current trends, Shriver does not give a direct answer in this segment, but implicitly points to the difficulty of finding societies with stable immigration policies, cultural confidence, and demographic sustainability. This question underscores the broader crisis of Western civilization and the search for viable futures.